On today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we take a first look at a big upcoming rivalry matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and the San Francisco 49ers, a rematch of the 2023 NFC Championship game.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our code, which is in all lowercase, LockedOnNFL, for a first deposit match up to $100. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri, and what another matchup we have. It's been the gauntlet. Again, we've had some great matchups to talk about against Miami, Dallas, Kansas City, Buffalo. But, Gino, this one's a little extra personal, right? Because the 49ers, of course, were the team the Eagles beat in the NFC title. So for the Eagles, I don't think there's as much bad blood as there is on the other side for San Francisco. Very similar to the quote-unquote beef in 2017 with Minnesota or with New Orleans, right? But at the same time, the 49ers have talked so much trash this offseason that I think they did form more bad blood in Philadelphia than there would have been if they didn't say anything at all. So I think the Eagles want this one too pretty bad. And Haason Reddick's already been talking this week to line them back up.
It's going to be a chippy game, and I think
100%.
Everybody had this one circled. And just like I said a couple of weeks ago against that Kansas City team, don't let this be your Super Bowl. Don't let it consume
it's
you.
Not the Eagles.
Yeah, it's consumed Niners Nation. Like the players, fans, this is what they've been looking at.
They're whining more than Minnesota and New Orleans did back in the day.
Brock Purdy wasn't beating Jalen Hurts. He's 1-31 under Shanahan in coming back when down 3 points in the fourth quarter. Your quarterback wasn't outdueling Jalen Hurts.
Well, that's what
even
bothers
on the
me.
best day.
They act like they were missing Patrick Mahomes. And they also act like it was pure luck that Haason Reddick took out Purdy in that game when you were the ones that put a backup tight end on who was at the time, I think, the best edge rusher in football, right? You know, the way Haason Reddick was playing heading into the playoffs, there was nobody better than him. And you put a tight end on him. That's not luck. That's execution and decision-making on your end.
You talk about how the Eagles just have all this great luck all of a sudden. It's like, oh, no, maybe just actually line up and don't do dumb football decisions by putting a backup tight end on Haason Reddick. And it was clear, even on the best day, the Eagles were winning that game. And much like 2017, when New Orleans fans thought they were going to come into Lincoln Financial Field, that was not going to happen. That Eagles team was different. They were on one that day. It really felt like that in San Francisco. They came at them early. I think this game it's going to be very similar. It's going to be one in the trenches. You know, those edge rushers now with the added Chase Young. They have Javon Hargrave, who was in Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah.
It's really going to be won and lost up front. But ultimately, Lou, I look at the quarterbacks. I look at Brock Purdy in the rain. He hasn't been very good in the rain. Our guy in Jalen Hurts has been exceptional when adversity hits. I think that's what it comes down to once again. And just don't let it consume you. Even our fans, don't let Niners fans really upset you. Let them say whatever they want. They can take their moral victory trophy, hang their banner. We lost to the Eagles in the NFC Championship. We all know what happened that day.
Yeah,
we all know that a Philadelphia Eagles team was much more talented.
And they're a really good football team. They're one of the best rosters. They're a top 3 roster in the NFL as well. They are the team still that I'm concerned with the most when it comes to getting out of the NFC over Detroit, over Dallas, over Seattle, and the other contenders, quote unquote, in this conference. But at the same time, I think you look at it and I think the Eagles were a better team then. I think they're a better team now. Quarterback is that huge reason, but it is just crazy. They think if Purdy was in there, suddenly they were going to blow the roof off of the Eagles. I mean, Brandon Aiyuk said they got lucky. Deebo Samuel called James Bradberry trash, even though he was an all-pro at the time. Robbie Gould said if they would have made Jalen Hurts play quarterback, they would have won the game. as if this year hasn't proved that Jalen Hurts in the pocket can win games even when he can't run. So that was dispelled too. There was one of their secondary, their defensive backs was like almost threatening cheap shots against A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith this year. Just, you could tell how real bitter they were. And look, I do get it. They feel like they didn't have a chance at all because both quarterbacks got hurt, which is very rare. But again, that's self-inflicted. You got to protect your guys, man. I mean, I don't know what else you want me to say. Maybe don't have just Josh Johnson as your only backup to Brock Purdy.
No, and I'm not going to be the guy that ever feels bad for having a backup quarterback go into
the Eagles
a playoff
won a
game.
Super Bowl, and they had to make every playoff game they've ever played since the early 2000s. I feel like at times a backup had to come in.
Jeff Garcia,
or at least
Michael
the
Vick,
2010s. Yeah,
Nick Foles. I mean, the list goes on and on. Yeah, Josh McCown with a torn hamstring.
Yeah,
with a torn hamstring.
McCown with a torn hamstring almost won you a game. I don't want to hear it.
No, I don't. It's excuses. And frankly, I think there are a lot of excuses against why the Philadelphia Eagles are good. And like you said, none of anybody's arguments are trying to like bump up other teams. It's trying to discredit what the Philadelphia Eagles have done. And I can't take that away because I've seen them disprove us so many times, especially this year in the last couple of weeks, Lou. Like there was on NFL Network today, the other car, the crappier car said, I don't see a situation where the Eagles win this game. What do you mean you don't see a situation where the Eagles have won this game? They've shown you every single hand that they can play and they can win in a multitude of different ways. It doesn't matter if San Fran has an answer. The Eagles have a counterpunch.
Well, and when you look at that game in the NFC title, it wasn't just they won because San Francisco didn't have a quarterback. If you look at early on, the first drive of the game, they marched down the field and scored a touchdown, and their offensive line was dominating San Francisco's defensive line. So that was strength on strength, and the Eagles completely erased them in that fashion. So to act like even if Purdy was in there, and sure, maybe they were going to score more points, of course they would have, compared to not having a quarterback at all. But to say like this Eagles offense was going to have no success when they were running up and down the field, I don't know. So you even look at the strength on strength battles of that matchup, the Eagles were winning them at the time, before it, of course, got out of hand.
And I think the way to attack San Francisco in this game is to go at their defensive line in terms of running the football. I think just going at that unit, which is known for getting upfield, known for being a pressure-heavy identity, use that against them. And the Eagles, like you said, they marched down the field in that first part of the game. I think the Eagles won that trench battle. Like they instilled their will well throughout that game.
Well, and on the other side, clearly they did because they took out two quarterbacks. So they were winning that battle too.
100%. And that's what it's going to have to boil down to. We know San Francisco is going to be able to run the ball. We know they're going to be able to pass the ball. We know they're going to put up points. So I think the approach that you have is do exactly what you have done the last couple weeks, but this time hopefully stop the quarterback like you did with Patrick Mahomes. You're not playing Josh Allen. It's a completely different player in Brock Purdy. Those times when you got hands on Josh last week and he was able to escape, you're probably going to be able to take Brock Purdy down. I think it's take away that really good run game of San Francisco. You're going to have to be super sound when it comes to gap fits, your pursuit outside. You're going to have multiple guys chasing after the ball because if Trent Williams gets out on an island, he's going to take out at least one of your cornerbacks. You got to stop their run game because that really opens up what they want to do.
That's their bread and butter.
It is. That's how they succeed.
That's what their entire offense is run off of. And that's because Brock Purdy, when he's trailing, he struggles. So I want to get into that quarterback matchup coming up next because that's the huge advantage. Two of the best, maybe the two best rosters in the league, whereas the tiebreaker, it honestly, by a long shot, is at the most important position. So we'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
After I get done recording this episode of LOE, I'm going to hop on my phone, hop on the DoorDash app, and get me something good to eat. And all of our listeners can get in on the action over at DoorDash. Today, we're going to get you 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. All you got to do, download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. So if it's your first order, you want to get a cheesesteak from Day Rossi's, get a pizza from Santucci's, grab yourself a hoagie from Wawa, get your groceries from Wegmans. You can do all that over at DoorDash. This Sunday, I don't think you're going to want to get off the couch, have food delivered right to your door when you watch that Eagles-Niners game. There's only one place to do it. It is over at DoorDash right before the game starts. Hop on that app, put in the code LOCKED23. That's LOCKED 23. Subject to change. Terms do apply.
Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is also sponsored by Prize Picks Daily Fantasy. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball, which is awesome. I'm a diehard basketball fan. The Specials League allows you to pick football and basketball players together, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you could take LeBron James to have, and let's say like Devontae Smith at a 10.5 combo of 3 points made and receptions. You want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players as well, like rapper Meek Mill. Of course, you want that in Philadelphia. Comedian Andrew Schultz. You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each and every week. Prize Picks even offers, this is awesome, a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return for the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Head over to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, go over to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL, use our code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, exciting news. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Eagles 49ers this Sunday, a rematch of the NFC Championship game. A lot of bad blood here, both sides talking. It's going to be a fun one for sure. It's a revenge game for San Francisco. For the Eagles, it's a put up and shut up, right? It's, okay, you've got your quarterback now. Let's see if you can actually hang with us because you couldn't in the NFC title. And, you know, even though, like, yes, of course, Brock Purdy coming back is going to be a huge difference. He is a much better quarterback than I gave him credit for last year. I still think he's in that, you know, Jared Goff, Geno Smith type of tier. Like, he's not a star.
What do you mean? He's Tom Brady 2.0. He's the MVP
of
the league. He's how everybody should talk about Jalen Hurts, but they talk about Brock Purdy like that.
I will say at the same time, though, he isn't the fluke that I thought he was last year. I thought that was a total mirage, and he wasn't even going to be the starter this year. I honestly thought they were going to go back to Trey Lance. So it's going to be a much closer game. The 49ers are an elite roster. Like, we're not delusional. They made the NFC title for a reason. This has been one of the most consistent teams in the NFL for the last, 7 years because of Kyle Shanahan, because of this roster. But even with Purdy healthy, when you look at these two rosters, they are so even. The one massive advantage the Eagles have is at the most important position. Like Jalen Hurts versus Purdy, I really don't think it's close. And last year, the Eagles won in spite of Hurts being injured, and he really wasn't even passing the ball that well against the 49ers. This is a different version of Hurts. That's the thing. Like, yes, the 49ers are getting Purdy back, which the Eagles didn't have to deal with. The 49ers are getting a healthier, better version of Hurts than they saw in January.
Right. We forget that Jalen Hurts was not 100%.
Yeah, man, the shoulder injury, he was not healthy.
I mean, we hate to talk about the guy, but Donovan McNabb. I put a Christmas tree in the studio, and I have a Donovan McNabb ornament, and I didn't put it on the tree because he's still in our bad graces.
Good.
But even he said when he talked to Jalen that shoulder was way worse than we thought it was, too. So we have to take that into account. Sure. Definitely. And yes, Brock Purdy being back, it is going to obviously give you a better test than Christian McCaffrey was, of course. But I think we really need to slow our roll on the whole Brock Purdy conversation, because if you're going to throw Christian McCaffrey in the MVP conversation,
that says a lot.
It says a lot. It says a lot about the guy that's throwing the football. And you also have Deebo, and you also have George Kittle. Like, yeah, he does a good job with what I think. Obviously, it's very similar with Mike McDaniel, what they do down in Miami, where it's like put the ball on the spot. It's timing. It's a lot of hitting guys in spaces. That's a skill as a quarterback. Like a timing rhythm quarterback, that is a certain brand, and Kyle Shanahan found his guy. Mm-hmm. But when it boils down to it, Lou, I think your guy in Jalen Hurts can make more plays for you as just being the guy, right? Like Brock has a lot of help. We know that. So does Jalen Hurts. But who accounts for more plays? I'd love that statistic that you put out on Twitter for Jalen Hurts' MVP campaign, that he's accounted for 67% of all of the Eagles' touchdowns this season, with 29% of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, Brock Purdy, like, you give the ball to Christian McCaffrey, McCaffrey's going to account for a lot of them. When it comes to the battle and who is going to win a shootout, I'm going to trust the guy who I literally saw do exactly that a week ago. Yeah. Even though Brock is back, like, it's going to be a big time bump. I don't think people talk about Brock Purdy in the light that he should be talking. They talk about him, like I said, like Jalen Hurts should be talked about, in my opinion, that he is the next coming, the guy that is doing it all for this team. When he's out, they're going to lose. When he's in, they're going to win. That's Jalen Hurts, but we talk about Brock Purdy in that way. And
I think it's the opposite. I think Kyle Shanahan's proven that any quarterback that's in there, he can win with, right? I mean, he's made a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, he's done this now with Brock Purdy. I mean, he's done this over and over again. So, yes, like I will give Brock Purdy some credit. He is much better off script when it comes to comparing him to like a Jared Goff. I think when the play breaks down, he is much better at creating on his own compared to some of the other quote-unquote game managers or products of a certain elite offensive system. But you're right, at the same time, when you look at how their offense runs versus the Eagles, it's so clearly more controlled by the running back, by the play caller, by Deebo Samuel and Brandon Aiyuk, which compared to the Eagles, of course, they do have all those stars as well, and they've got a good play caller and a good head coach too. But you can just tell Jalen is the reason that play is happening more than Purdy, if that makes sense.
I would tend to agree with you. I mean, let's not take
like it's
it away.
running. The play's running through him.
Yeah.
The Niners plays never feel like they're running through the quarterback.
I get what you're saying. It's like you want to play pitch and catch with Brock Purdy to an extent. Mm-hmm. Like you want to just get that ball in a playmaker's hands and let him go, right? Like it's going to just come down to, in my opinion, forcing that guy to make turnovers. Because it does come down to that rhythm and timing element. You have to mess up that rhythm and timing somehow.
Get him to hold on to the football, for sure.
Unlike where it might have been a bad plan to get Josh off of his spot last week because he kind of tore you up in that regard.
Sure.
I would want to get Brock Purdy off of his spot and, like, let's see if you could beat me to the edge. Like Jordan Davis would have hawked down Brock Purdy on that play, right? Like he's not getting out of bounds. And there's several times that I think this Eagles front is going to capitalize on that. And that's what it has to come down to. It has to come down to messing up the Niners front, whether it's run game, whether it's pass game, and just making Purdy get out of
and
that
they're
structure.
susceptible on the right side, Gino. I think you can get them more on the right side.
Well, yeah, I mean, you lose McGlinchey. You obviously don't have Trent Williams on that side of the ball. I wouldn't want to go and attack Trent Williams, even though I'll line up Josh Sweat and hope we get a good one-on-one there. But you just have to, I mean, if you look at San Francisco, it's such a poetry in motion type of offense, right? Mm-hmm. Like everybody has to get to their spot in a well-coordinated, rhythmic type of manner. And just, I think sending run blitzes where you're able to kind of like get that puller off of his spot and make him take another one or two steps to get out there.
Disguise some coverages too.
A lot of simulated pressure early on, in my opinion. Like make Purdy think and make that run game just get off by maybe a quarter of a second, maybe half a second to slow things down for you. We know that San Francisco's offense is very, very good, but so is their defense. If I were to have to put the money on it, what wins the game for them, Lou? Could it be the defense in an area where Jalen Hurts, we know that those turnovers do happen. Can they find a way to make Jalen make a mistake? That's what they have to avoid.
I think that's the key for both teams, right? Is forcing pretty flawless offenses into forcing any sort of turnover, because against two of the best teams in the league, again, it's going to come down to those few plays. We'll continue to get into this matchup. Coming up next, this is the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. They have the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many qualified candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles, taking a first look at a huge matchup this Sunday between the Eagles and the 49ers. If the Eagles can get this win, it would be incredible. Then you would have beaten Miami, Dallas, Kansas City, Buffalo, and San Francisco. If we would have said when the schedule came out they would go undefeated in that stretch, I would have said you're nuts, even considering how good this football team is. It's one of the best rosters in the league that they are playing. Gino, we talked about some of the keys in segment 2. You talked about disguise pressure, making sure Brock Purdy gets off his first read, forcing him into mistakes, limiting turnovers on offense. I think another key is getting a lead early. This offense needs to start faster because when you look at the numbers, yes, if you don't, Jalen Hurts playing from behind this year, there's not a quarterback better in football. Not Mahomes, not Allen, not Lamar, none of them. Jalen Hurts statistically is the best quarterback this year when he's trailing from pretty much every number that you can pull up. Brock Purdy, meanwhile, when you look at passer rating, Jalen Hurts is number 1 this year when trailing in the second half. When it comes to passer rating, Brock Purdy is 32nd. So if you can get a lead, especially by multiple scores, again, it's going to be tough because this is a really good football team, but that would be huge. Make Brock Purdy, again, have to carry that offense.
As I said earlier in the show, the Shanahan-led Niners are 1-31.
Yeah.
They won win.
I saw that. Crazy.
In 32 opportunities when they are trailing by 3
Does
points
it shock
or more
you,
in the
though,
fourth
considering
quarter.
their quarterback track record? It doesn't really surprise me.
I think it's more on the head coach. Kind of been in
Sure,
that
it's
situation a couple times, and
That's fair.
28-3 away, but that's for another day.
true.
And no, I'm with you. I think getting out to a lead, and this could be one of those opportunities where you really take a dominant middle 8 and use that to your advantage, where let's say you defer like you have been the last couple games. You can get that pre-halftime touchdown. Let's say you go up 3 points at half or 7 points at half, and then you could get another score coming out of half and go up 2 scores. That would be ideal. But starting fast, Lou, and holding on to that lead, I think that's another element of this team that I would really like to see. I think we've seen that a couple times against Tampa Bay, against the Rams, but then there have been situations like against Washington a couple times where that team has kind of got their way back into it. And let's see if you could do that against a really, really good team. Like you said, you've been down in these last couple games. You've been down against Dallas. You've been down against Kansas City. You've been down against Buffalo Bills. What happens when you're leading that game? Can you really instill your will? Can you get back to these 6, 7, 8 minute drives where you're just winding down the clock and just making that defense, which I think that's how you have to go against San Francisco's defense. Yes, they are very deep, but keeping them on the field and getting them winded and having these long tenured drives is really a way that
that's
you
what they
can
did in
use
the
that
NFC title,
advantage
right?
against them. Definitely.
I think that's what they did in the championship game, and I think you got to make sure on the other side that doesn't happen, and I'm kind of concerned about that. The Eagles' run defense has been number 1 in the league the majority of the year, but they struggled against Kansas City. They struggled a little more against Buffalo. I wouldn't say the entire game they struggled, but they allowed more than they have normally this year. Now you're without Zach Cunningham, who was your best run-stopping linebacker. Hamstring strain. Sounds like he's going to be out for this game, potentially longer. Hopefully it's not long-term. They are visiting with Shaq Leonard today, though, so that's something to keep an eye out for. But yeah, I think that's another key, Gino, because as we mentioned, the Niners offense, although they have Brandon Aiyuk, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, they have some elite pass catchers. It runs through the run game and Christian McCaffrey, so you have to stop them on that side as well.
Without a doubt. That's what it comes down to. And
Jordan Davis is huge in this game.
I've said that's what it comes down to a lot. But there are a lot of keys to success in this game, and I think just keeping that offense off of the field. You have to, because they're explosive. They have, I think they're top in the league right now for explosive plays created.
I believe so, yeah.
They are able to get 20 plus yard plays time and time again. Yeah, I was trying to figure that out. But if you look at last week, Lou, that's an area without Zach Cunningham that they were susceptible, especially late in that
Christian
game, those
Ellis,
big explosive plays with Christian Ellis. Shanahan is going to look at that tape, say, where's that weak point?
And try to
line him up. We're going to go and attack it.
Yep. And try to get the mismatch against him, too. If he's going to try to get McCaffrey on Ellis in space, I'm sure of it.
I think what San Francisco wants to do a lot is to just either one, if we're going to run between the tackles, we're going to go at Christian Ellis. Yeah. But we're going to get this ball outside and see if the guys outside can tackle, much like Kansas City did with Isaiah Pacheco a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
That's the way to attack the Philadelphia Eagles on the ground, is let's not go at Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and Fletcher Cox. Let's see if James Bradberry and those guys can get out on an island. And let's see if their off-ball linebackers are going to pursue and get through one block to go and make the block. That's where the Eagles are susceptible. But when it comes to the cornerback game plan, Lou, we talked about this. We know that we shadowed with Darius Slay last week. I think you just put those guys out there on each side and just
you can't this time.
You got to let them play wherever they're comfortable. You keep them there. The matchups are going to come. Everybody's going to get their hand at one of the guys. Deebo on Bradberry, Deebo on Slay, Deebo, I'm sure, on Bradley Roby at times. Just keep the guys where they're comfortable, and hopefully you can limit this offense.
You need the 2022
You know they're going to
corners.
have explosive plays.
Yeah, no, for sure. You need the 2022 corners to show back up, though. Slay had a good week against Buffalo last week. Bradberry made some big plays, but he's got to back up. Deebo Samuel called him trash, and Bradberry's got to back up that trash talk and make sure he has a good game because it's very important against a loaded offense. We'll continue to get into this matchup tomorrow. Crossover Thursday with Brian Peacock of Locked On 49ers. Gino and I have another show on Friday for you as well. So lots of Eagles-Niners coverage still for you right here on your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Locked On Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. We'll see you tomorrow. As always, thank you for downloading, thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.